have to admit it looks a lot better, doesn't it? Well, we're not finished yet. One thing I haven't talked about yet in this series are sanding blocks. You probably saw me using this block here. This is a very common block, easy to use. You get these at paint stores, almost any hardware, auto parts store. The rubber part just flips up, and there's some sharp nails there, by the way, where you snag the paper in. So these were a couple of these, one with 40, one with 80 grit, and then you can change it out to finer grits when you move up to the final stage, are just fine. But boy, when you get work in different types of dents, there's these real stiff wood ones where you're working real flat areas. Notice I've loaded this up with 80 grit. You've got long ones that are a little flexible, okay? And then you've got others that are really flexible. This is called a wonder block. And see, it's like rubber. Now, I will be using the wonder block on this dent when we get down to the final guide coat sanding, because I want to be able to roll it, see? And you can actually get the paper on this and twist it and bend it while you're sanding. And then, of course, you've got longer, stiff wood ones like this here. And you can even get these small pads that are used for wet sanding and stick sandpaper on them, and you can curve them like this. So you can get a curve to that. It's stiff, but it's enough to curve it. So while you're sanding, you can get the shape you want. So I may use a combination of these when we finish up on this dent, but in this part I want to talk about the final finishing. That's the final coat and the final blocking before primer. And this is where we're going to talk about using a guide coat to see just where you are. And right now, I'm going to pull this old masking tape off and get it set up. I'll kind of show you how I get it set up to sand in preparation for that final coat. You're going to begin to see why I use a guideline, and you're going to definitely see why I use this masking tape. I'd have a bunch of scratches into this good paint area, so before I do the blocking, before this final coat, I'm going to pull this masking tape off, and you're going to get to see how well this protected the paint. And you can kind of see how that filler has come right up to the guideline. And of course, that guideline is giving me a very good reference point. Man, it's hard to get it off with these gloves. By the way, I didn't mention in the previous video, I'm sure some of you, well, where do you get those green gloves, Kent? Oh, well, I carry these on my website in boxes of 50, so you probably won't be able to find these, but if you want a pair, you know where to go. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do, this is sticking up above the original paint here. Okay. So I'm going to have to do a little more sanding. And I want to feather this right in. So I'm going to put some more tape down, but I'm going to bring the tape out now to about an inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch past that guideline, because that's where I'm going to do my taper sanding and feathering to make sure that it's blending right into the original fender line. And I don't want to scratch that paint up either. So here we go again. I'll be a little more careful so I don't have to worry quite as much about getting a lot of it on. But I think you get the point here. You've already seen how well I protected the original paint. And so now the next step is to go ahead and block this out a little bit more until I just see that edge start to break through. And that'll let me know that I'm right on level grade with the original paint. Now, I'm not going to be worried about sanding too far, because once again, this isn't the final coat. You see, I've only sanded this with 40 grit, so it's very rough. But what this is going to do is it's going to make sure I'm level height-wise with the original paint, And it will also confirm whether or not I've got any additional high spots that are going to break through that I might need to tap back in, because my goal here is to apply one smooth, thin final coat, and then when I come back and sand it, I'm sanding a filler that is consistently hard, and I'll be able to get it really smooth and flat. You can see I have my fan running with the filter. We're going to be creating some really fine dust here, so I'm going to don my paint respirator and start blocking with the 80 grit. You won't be able to hear me talk, but I think you'll be able to see what I'm trying to accomplish. Okay, hear me now? Let's talk about where we are now. You saw I was using 80 grit for all my blocking in preparation for this final fill. And you can see now, if this isn't a classic example why you need to work up to a final fill, I don't know what is. And by the way, for you new to auto body repair, this is not an easy dent to begin with. I recommend you start out with a dent like in the middle of a fender or middle of the door rather than getting something on a damaged lip in a multiple compound curve. This can be really challenging. But look, I blocked this down. My goal initially was to get this guide edge right flush, okay, with the original paint right in here. And I'm getting really close, but I'm breaking through right there, and I'm breaking through right there, and I'm breaking through right there. So I've got 3 high spots. And if I keep sanding, those high spots are just going to create more problems for me. So once again, I'm going to need to tap those down lightly before I put that final coat on. So I'm going to tap those down lightly, and then I got to come in and block until I'm sure that there's no lip here where the filler meets the guideline to the original paint. But you look right down here, I got a low spot. See that? It's breaking through here, but it's not sanding out. So I'm gonna have to come in and do a little work right in here, a little high spot there. So I have a little bit more work to do. You notice when I was sanding this, man, that's tough. You've got to do this by braille, folks, because you just can't do this and you can't do that. As I've said, you've got to be able to. This is where you have to feel. Okay, you have to feel. And I've got a little more work. It's a little bit high right in there, so I'll give it a rest for the day, and then we'll come back tomorrow, and I'm gonna tap these high spots down, and we're going to get this blocked a little bit more, and then we're going to come in and we're going to put one final coat on and do a nice guide coat blocking to finish this off. Well, I'm ready to put that final coat on, and this is how it looks right now. I mean, it's really close, but I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Kent, especially you guys out there that have done body work, you're probably thinking, Kent, you're being way too particular, you know. You could just, you know, don't worry about these little high spots and little imperfections and just get a 2-part urethane thick build primer and spray a bunch of primer on there and block it out. And that's what I would do, and that's what most body shops will do. But you got to remember, I'm gearing this video series for the home DIY body guy. He's not going to have spray equipment nor the protection to spray that what I consider really nasty 2-part primer. So we're going to be using a quality spray can. This is not your normal hardware spray can primer, folks. This is about a $20 a can special K build primer that body shops can use for spot repair. But if you're going to use spray can primer, you got to be a lot more particular how that final coat comes out. Right now I picked up, here's a couple of pinholes. You know, those aren't going to be filled up with spray can primer. I've still got these little high spot areas that look what I've done here. I just took and once again I got my hammer and my center punch, and I just hammered each one of those down. Now you got to be careful. Don't hammer too much. If you hammer it too much, you can raise the metal in another area, or you can even crack the filler. So I just kept tapping lightly, and then taking my hand, I can feel that these are all on a little bit on the low side. And then I grabbed the Wonder Block. You can see I've wrapped a piece of 80 grit sanding disc around it, and I roll that Wonder Block and blocked over this filler again. Notice I'm using 45 degrees. You know, I go one way at a 45 degree, and then I go another way at a 40. Just don't sand back and forth on one plane, or you're going to have a problem. So, you know, I apologize, okay, that this video series seems to be so long, but I really chose this dent. This really isn't a beginner's dent, but I chose this dent because I knew I would run into all these little situations that can drive you crazy in your first attempts at bodywork. And even usually what I try to do, I try to get, you know, that base coat on one time and block it in, and then put the finish coat on, I'm done. And even here, I had so much metal stretch in this area, you can see I was chasing, I call this chasing the fill, because I'm chasing these high spots a little bit. So I'm doing, you know, really 3 applications, which I normally don't do. But I think it's important that you see all this, because you kind of, hopefully you'll learn something new. You know, even if you've done body work before, And I don't claim to be the world's expert on auto body dent repair by any means. So I'm always learning something new all the time. Notice I pulled the tape off. And what I'm going to do now is where that sand line was, I'm going to come up with Scotch-Brite and go out about another inch. That's just in case when I put this final fill on that maybe I go a little past that sand area, and if there's any filler left, you want to make sure the surface has been abraded, even if it's just been abraded with Scotch-Brite. So I'm going to come out with about another inch past that previous sand line and rough that in. Now I'm not going to put any tape on now because I want a straight shot at spreading the filler on. But once I do, I will put some more tape back on here before I do the final blocking. Okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to mix up that final filler. I'm going to bring my heat lamp in and turn it on while I'm mixing, and we'll come back in and let's see if I can get this final coat on in one try. I'm going to use 2 spreaders here. I'm going to use a small spreader. I'm going to come in and make sure I press hard to make sure I get these little bubbles filled. Also the low spots, I'll kind of fill those first. Give that a good wipe in there. Now this front edge is already pretty good, so I don't have to do a lot. I'll just put a little bit right around the corner here to make sure I get any little air bubbles and deep sand scratches full, because I'm going to come the other way. Okay, now I'll switch to the big spreader. And this is where the practice comes in, you know, don't put it on too thick, because I'm not going to be using a cheese grater or even the 40 grit on this final sanding. I am going to be sanding this final coat starting with 80, and then I will step it down. Okay, you want to be careful, I'm pretty happy with how that looks right now. I'm going to come in, just get a little bit more right here. Make sure I'm not chasing this bottom low spot. Okay. Now I'll just clean up this front edge a little bit. Now notice I'm not worried about it sticking down. I'd rather have it a little bit more on that front edge to work with. I put less catalyst in this final coat because that is absolutely the worst thing that can happen, is have it kick off. Now I'll come along this outer edge here in any area where I may have gone past that line where I did the Scotch-Brite. I'm going to take it off. See that? Okay, I'm going to leave that. If I keep playing with this, I can make it worse. So you got to be careful. Don't overwork or try to overspread this final coat. This next step is very important. If you haven't done body work before, you know, this is extremely important. This is the final coat. And on the final coat, we do not use a cheese grater and we do not use 40 grit paper. Because what will happen is you'll end up with a cheese grater, you'll end up gouging areas and they go too deep for you to be able to sand it out. Same with you get into this really rough 40 grit and you start trying to shape this, those scratches can go so deep that when we do the guide coat and the final blocking, you won't get those scratches out, and then you'll have to come back in and fill with some more filler or some glazing putty. So at this point, the only thing I use is 80 grit. Nothing more coarse than 80 grit. I use my old pieces of 80 grit because they're going to plug up very fast. This is just tacked off and it's still very soft. And what I want to do is come in and just knock off the glaze. If I knock off the glaze, then it makes it easier to sand with my new paper. I also want to shape this front edge a little bit more. So watch, we'll turn the, okay, turn that fan on. All right, now, I'm just going to lightly knock off the high spots. See that? I'm just knocking off the high spots with this 80 grit. And I'm knocking off that glazing that you'll see on the filler. And I'll do that over the whole area here. There you can see the high spots as I diagonally sand this. So I'm not going to do anything other than knock the glaze off, and then I will take this paper. I'm going to go around on the other side and have to work this front edge. I'm going to actually roll the paper around the edge like this, see? Okay, I think you got the idea now. I want to put my mask back on. You know, it's tough trying to do this and talk to you. So I'm going to be sanding a little bit. I'll rough this in. Then I'll come back and we'll do the final blocking to see if we get this in one application.